Welcome to the 12th edition of Primetime Pards, where we feature former Lafayette students who have gone on to excel in their chosen fields. Good evening, everyone. I'm Gary Laubach. And tonight we continue celebrating 50 years of coeducation at Lafayette as we welcome our special guest from the class of 1979, Dr. Catherine Hanlon. I do want to mention to you that this is being held on Zoom webinar. It's a platform that, because of the attendance, the number of people who are watching tonight that we are using, questions can be submitted on the webinar via the Q&A feature, and we certainly welcome any questions from our audience. Please let me introduce to you our guest tonight. Semi-retired as of this past August, Dr. Hanlon practiced emergency medicine for over 30 years. As a Lafayette graduate, Catherine majored in biology and minored in French. At Lafayette, she lettered in basketball and lacrosse. Lacrosse is a sport she had never played prior to coming to Lafayette. Putting forth the same intensity in learning lacrosse as she did in the classroom and on the basketball court, she was named the fourth best left defensive wing in the country as a junior and was named captain of a Lafayette team that went on to the NCAA championship final in her senior year. Following graduation, she went on to Hanlon Medical School in Philadelphia and graduated in 1983. After completing her internship, Catherine joined the U.S. Air Force as a flight surgeon, studying aviation medicine and aerospace physiology. She became a member of the 63rd Jolly Green Helicopter Squad in Europe, serving 4 years in the military. After returning home, she became certified in internal medicine and emergency medicine. She practiced emergency medicine for the next 24 years, being named Top Doctor of the Year for 4 straight years and Educator of the Year. She served as chairman of the ER at Monmouth Medical Center. She continues to work in the area of hyperbolic medicine, treating those with chronic wounds. With all those accomplishments, she continues an extremely active life, enjoying her many pastimes, which we will eventually get to tonight. First of all, Dr. Hanlon, Catherine, welcome to Primetime Pards. It's such a pleasure to have you here with us tonight.
Thank you. It's great to be here, but I think the honor is all mine. It's a little overwhelming with all the amazing athletes we've had at Lafayette. I'm very happy to be here.
Yeah, I think it's great news that we don't seem to run out of people who deserve to be on Primetime Pards. You certainly are near the top. Let's go back to your childhood a little bit and get ourselves through your life to where you are right now. You grew up in Rutherford, New Jersey. So Catholic education, graduated from St. Mary's, obviously with honors. Tell us a little bit about your childhood.
Well, I grew up in North Jersey in the town of Rutherford. It's basically a suburb of New York. So, it was a suburban environment. It was not city, but it was a small town, and there were only 125 in my graduating class. Both of my parents were school teachers. Education was important, and it was stressed. My father had been a very big athlete at his alma mater. He's in the Hall of Fame at Montclair State for basketball. Mom had been a cheerleader through high school and college, so she was used to being very active. And physical activity was stressed as important, just, in the same way that academics were. It's academics and athletics were looked at two different sides of the same coin.
When I look at the things that you did participate in high school, I noticed you really didn't have free time beyond athletics and beyond academics. You played basketball, football, soccer, you skied, and a lot of the times you were competing with boys. So you certainly weren't intimidated by that.
Well, no, but back then, if you look at the numbers, I think I graduated high school in 75, and I think the numbers were back then 1 in 26 or 27 girls played organized sports. Today, that number is 1 in 3. Now, I think some of that is due to Title IX. Some of that is due to the recognition of the health benefits of being physically active. And some of it is the recognition that organized athletics, organized sports are just as good structurally for women as they are for men.
Did your dad kind of push you towards this, or was it something you just naturally went to?
He didn't have to push at all. It was more a matter of, what are you doing this week? So anything that I expressed an interest in and not just me, but I have a younger sister and a younger brother. Anything that we expressed an interest in doing physically, he encouraged.
Did you already know or have a sense that science and biology and medicine was going to be part of your life?
Well, I was always more interested in the sciences. I loved the hours that I spent with a microscope, and I loved, my bio labs and chemistry. So I was more drawn towards the sciences. I didn't really start thinking about medicine. I suppose by the time I hit junior high, it was something I was looking at.
Mm-hmm. And obviously now you have to make a college choice. What were the choices available to you? And then ultimately, why did you choose Lafayette?
I was lucky in that both of my parents had graduate degrees in education in addition to their undergrad. And one of the things that they did talk to me about was that many of your big name universities really make their mark at the graduate level. And the undergrads typically will take a back seat to graduate education. So I was looking primarily at colleges as opposed to universities where I would not be sort of a second string citizen as a student. So I looked at a couple of schools, but there was something, and I can't even give you a cognitive answer. It was more of just an emotional feeling that when I was on the Lafayette campus, it just felt different.
Was there a place that kind of came in second, and then Lafayette was the one you picked over that school?
No, I think by the time I had only looked at a couple of schools, but when I went onto the Lafayette campus, I liked it so much that I started focusing on that. And I didn't really want to look at any more schools afterwards.
Was a big part of that the fact that you thought you could play a number of sports there?
Well, I went to college primarily as a basketball player. I didn't know about powder puff football. I didn't know I was going to pick up lacrosse. So I was very happy to just be able to pick up or to be able to play basketball. I had met Sharon Mitchell, who was the director of women's athletics at the time, and spoke with her. So it then became, hey, they've got a women's football team. Well, I grew up as the only girl on my block playing football with the guys. So I was certainly able to get involved in that. And then in the spring, I'd played softball before, but I saw a bunch of friends of mine who I knew out on the quad with lacrosse sticks. And I was like, hey, how hard is that? So somebody put a lacrosse stick in my hand. And I obviously didn't have the attack skills that some of them did who'd played through junior high and high school. But much of the defense for lacrosse is very similar to basketball defense. Double team, weak side trap. It was almost instinctive. So the coach had me work with some of the upperclassmen on my stick work and my skills. And I started playing. My freshman year, it was just a club team. My sophomore year, thanks largely to, I believe it was Sue Oaks, and working with Coach Mitch, we became a varsity sport. So I was able to play 3 years of varsity lacrosse.
Did your parents have any concern that you maybe were overdoing it? Obviously your curriculum had to be very difficult, and yet you were playing sports throughout the whole year.
No, because I'd grown up always playing sports around, during the school year. If it wasn't something organized for school, it was something organized in the town. So, that was just, I think they would have been more surprised if I weren't doing something physically active.
I understand the biology choice. How about the French choice? What went into minoring in French?
I grew up, my mother's family is Italian, and my mother did not learn to speak English until she started grade school because Italian was spoken at home. So when we went over to my mother's side of the family, Italian was spoken in the house. And I think college should educate, not credential. And I wanted, as part of my education, I wanted to achieve proficiency in a language. Unfortunately, in Catholic high school, Latin was mandatory, which we bitched about it at the time. It was probably one of the best things I ever studied because it's the foundation, first of all, of over half of the English language. And it ties directly to French, Spanish, and Italian. And a lot of the medical terms are Latin. A lot of legal terms are Latin. So I probably had I had the option in high school of taking Italian, I would have done that because I already had a basis in it, but I was limited to French or Spanish. And at that point, French was the international language of travel. So I started actually in junior high taking French, took it from junior high all the way through high school. And then I did, I think, it was 5 or 6 semesters in college at Lafayette. And I was fortunate because it was a gal named Marie Beery, who was a year behind me, lived on my floor when I was a sophomore. She was a freshman. She was from Belgium. The northern Belgians speak Flemish. The southern Belgians speak Walloon, which is a dialect of French. So we just made it a point that whether we were in the bio lab, on the quad, in the dorm, we always spoke French to each other. And it helped my proficiency tremendously. And I'm actually still in touch with her. I see her whenever I go to Europe.
Can you tell us, talk to us a little bit about the education you got at Lafayette? I mean, are there certain professors that stick out in your mind, certain classes that stick out in your mind, certain challenges that do that?
Well, I think certainly if you're going to be an athlete at Lafayette, no matter what your major is, but certainly if you're in the sciences where you've got labs, 3-hour labs, you have to be very good at time management. And that in itself is an education. So the ability to prioritize, manage your time. I mean, yeah, sometimes it was difficult. You come home from an away game, it's 10 o'clock at night, you get a couple of fingers taped up because they were jammed, you got ice on your knee, and you've got a chemistry test tomorrow. So you're sitting there burning the midnight oil with a book. I mean, we used to joke about playing schools like Stroudsburg or some of the state colleges where they were majoring in phys ed. They didn't have the sort of academic difficulty that we did. So I think one of the first lessons and one of the most important lessons you had to learn if you're a student athlete is time management, or you were not going to do very well at either. I had a couple of great professors that I remember primarily from the bio department. I mean, John Caruso was instrumental. Bernie Freed, who I read just passed away, was a tremendous parasitologist. And in fact, when I went into the service, because I was doing field work, we could be deployed anywhere. Parasitology is very important in global medicine. I used to take my sophomore parasitology notes with me to use when I was stationed overseas. So there were a couple of other professors that I certainly remember more by face than by name. But what I loved is if you were having problems with a course, you could go right in and talk to the professor. You did not have to go see a TA. You did not have to go see, a supportive, staff support. You went right to the head of the head of the class to be able to get whatever assistance you need. And I always remember them being so willing to help any of us do what we need.
And I would think we could probably say the same thing today. I mean, I hear similar stories today from the athletes that I deal with. It's just a great personal university that teaches you the academics you need to have.
Yeah. And, I think I was lucky because, after 13 years of Catholic school, nuns are pretty liberal with how much homework they hand out. So I was coming home in high school. I was doing about 6 hours of homework a night in high school, with some of the classes that I was taking. So I think I was pretty well prepared for college. And then just being able to do the time management, as I said, of the athletics and the academics in college, I was able to pick that up, I think, because of my background with, my undergraduate education.
Let's talk a little bit about your success in lacrosse. I mean, it is somewhat amazing that you never picked up a stick before you went to college, and then to become basically a national star at your position, and then leading Lafayette and helping to lead Lafayette to a NCAA championship final. They must be great memories for you.
I have really good memories of that. And I think that we bonded as a team. You have to remember that when I came to Lafayette in the fall of '75, there were about 400 women and maybe 1,800 men on campus. There were no sororities. There were fraternities, living houses, but there were no sororities. But the women athletes bonded together and became very close. in essence, that was our sorority. That was your peer group, and that was our
Mhm.
sorority. So I have great memories of playing ball with my girlfriends, some of whom I shared the same major with. And many of us are friends today. I mean, Laura Roberts, Carol Way, Barb Kurlavage, Sue Longenbach, and I, we've gotten together for skiing, golf, a lot of events that we've done since we left Lafayette, and we've all stayed in touch. And I think that initial bonding experience of that was our social group really made a difference for us. I think what helped me with lacrosse is I guess I was lucky genetically, because I had two parents who were athletes. I didn't come to Lafayette as a lacrosse player. I feel like I came to Lafayette as an athlete, and Lafayette made me a lacrosse player.
Wow, and did a pretty good job of that for sure. All right, let's turn you into a doctor. You make that you graduated Lafayette. Do you already know what your life plans are?
Well, I had applied to med school, and when I was accepted, I went down to Hanneman. I mean, it's interesting because the transition from high school to college was not a big deal. The transition from college to med school was different. And none of it was, I've used this analogy with many of the students that I've mentored. None of this is rocket science. There's nothing they're going to throw at you that's going to be like astrophysics or quantum mechanics. It's going to be the sheer volume of what they throw at you that you have to master. But again, if you've been an athlete and you're used to time management, I think that helped me. It was also a very good outlet. I did not play I didn't really play any organized sports in med school. I didn't have the time. There was a group of Lafayette alumni that were lacrosse players that would get together on some Saturday mornings in the spring, and we'd have like pickup games. I played in a couple of those. I played soccer for the guys team just because it was the only thing that I could do. There was a club league in Philadelphia among the professional schools, so I would play some soccer with the guys. I wanted to stay physically active because I just find that when I'm physically active, I just feel better. I sleep better, I concentrate better, I handle stress better. And this is something that's been known in medicine for many, many years. One of the studies that I was very interested in that I read had to do with the fact that if you take people who are physically active, athletes who work out, the number of connections between the synapses in their brain goes up just from the physical activity alone. So, I mean, there is a neurochemical basis for exercise making you feel good and perform better. That was one of the things that drove me to become what's known as a CSCS. I am a certified strength and conditioning specialist. I did that in my early 40s just because I was very interested in the science and physiology of exercise. There are only, I want to say at last count, there are about 30 MDs in the country, cross-credentialed as CSCS specialists. Only 5 of us, I think, are women. And a CSCS, I mean, you can go be a personal trainer you can take an open book test online and go be a personal trainer in a gym someplace. But if you want to be the strength coach for the New York Giants defensive line, or you want to be the speed coach for the Olympic skating team, you become a CSCS level specialist because it is the science and physiology of exercise. You're going to condition a football player very differently than a baseball player, very differently than a swimmer. So the whole concept of sports-specific training to maximize performance and minimize injury that became much more of a science in the 80s was something I was interested in. So I went back and I got that certification. And that exam was as tough, if not tougher, than many of the medical exams I've taken.
Wow. So now you become an intern, you go to New York, Lenox Hill Hospital in New York. You know,
Right.
We watch a lot of TV shows, The Good Doctor and New Amsterdam and all. I don't know if you watch any of those. And my wife and I always kind of discuss how realistic they are. You're an intern now, and I mean, it looks so rigorous. They talk about how difficult, no sleep, no hours to yourself. Is it really all that?
It really is all that, but the people aren't nearly as good looking as the ones on TV. George Clooney is not walking through the ER, sorry.
No, it's not.
But it was, now I was an intern from 83 to 84, and this is back before the house staff work rules were put in place to limit the number of hours that residents and interns could work without getting a break, because there were some issues. Probably the most famous was the Libby Zion case in New York, where the daughter of a very prominent newspaperman ended up dead from what they thought might have been an over-fatigued resident giving her an inappropriate medication. There were actually some other issues that came to light later, but it did put the national spotlight on house staff work hours, and they did get cut back, which I'm glad to see, because I mean, when you're that exhausted, trying to learn and be responsible for someone's life is a little bit dicey. So I did my internship and then I left to go on active duty. Now you can't do that. Now you have to finish a full residency. But the interns, from internship, you go into residency, at least the hours get a little bit better and you get a little bit more of a break, but you really have no life at all, because when you're not working, you're sleeping. You know, you can't be up all night and then work the next day and go home and do anything. I was very glad that I was in New York, because if you've got 30 minutes of free time, New York's a great place to be, because you can do almost anything. You've got everything right there at your fingertips. So it was a great place to be a resident, to be an intern. But I just remember thinking, thank God that's over.
Is part of the training, though, the ability to think when you're so tired and so fatigued? And
some of it is the ability to think under pressure and when you're fatigued, but actually the biggest reason for it is and they're looking at this again now, you're cheap labor. It's basically a form of cheap labor. I was able to, I mean, I had a lot of energy and a lot of stamina, but even then you'd come home from call and you would just crash because you just needed to sleep.
then what led you? I mean, I would think, you know, you're an intern, you're getting ready to become a doctor and, you know, maybe live the good life, but not you. You decided to go into the United States Air Force, become a flight surgeon, involved in trauma, rescue, aviation medicine. I mean, what drove you to do that?
Well, first of all, I was on an Air Force scholarship through med school.
Okay.
The Air Force put me through med school, so I owed them 4 years of time when I was done, which to me seemed like a pretty good deal, considering that private med school back then was very expensive. And like I said, both my parents were school teachers. But one of the things, aviation medicine is not something you do in the civilian sector. I mean, many people, yes, the military services, they need internists and OBGYNs and surgeons and radiologists. But one of the areas that they have a particularly unique need for are aviation medicine specialists in the service, because flying a plane, a high performance aircraft, is not the same as just getting in a car and driving. There are more ways of you getting yourself killed up there due to changes in atmospheric pressure, spatial disorientation, different types of ear, nose, and throat problems. As I said, it's not like driving a car. And this was very, very new to me. It was not an area of medicine that I had heard about before. And I got very, very interested in this. My father flew for the Navy. He flew Hellcats in the Korean War. I had a brother at the time who had just graduated from the Air Force Academy. So it was something that when I heard about this and I investigated it, one of the interesting requirements to do aviation medicine in the military is you have to fly 4 hours a month in the type of aircraft that your pilots fly to become familiar with operational aeromedical problems. So I had to fly F-15s, F-16s, T-38s, F-5s. I have over 60 hours in supersonic aircraft. And it's not, like I said, it's not the same as getting in a car and just turning over the ignition. You can black out. I mean, G-forces can black you out. So you get to experience firsthand what those are like. So when the pilots come in and talk to you about what they're experiencing, you know what it means. I mean, it's like talking to a virgin about sex. They know all the words, but they have no idea what it feels like. I mean, there's nothing that there's no description that I can give you for what it's like to be at 37,000 feet pulling 4 Gs on an inside Immelman. Unless you're there, you have no idea what that pilot's going through.
Did you have any, I'm sure you did you have some medical experiences while you were in the service that were particularly difficult or traumatic or?
Well, the search and rescue is difficult because you never know if you're going to find somebody alive or not.
Mm-hmm.
And doing trauma rescue, because the military really trains you to do trauma. That's what they need if you're going to be in a field position. So I had far better trauma training than many of the civilian residents in terms of how they would do it. For example, they would set up an animal lab and they would anesthetize, they'd give general anesthesia to sometimes dogs, sometimes goats, and they would use high velocity impact rounds. So, basically shoot them so that they didn't feel it. And we had to do emergency surgery on them. And that's not standard training in the civilian sector. So when I went to medical school, I was actually, not surprisingly, very interested in orthopedics. I'd been an athlete. I was interested in sports medicine. But after 4 years of trauma rescue and that kind of training and seeing the difference that it made, I started coming around more and more to looking at what my options were, so that when I got out of the service, I went straight into the ER. And it was like a layup for me. It was a perfect fit.
You weren't even, you get out of the service. Was it a difficult decision to leave the service or were you ready to go?
Actually, I had re-upped for another tour. I was going to do one more tour on a base that had a big hospital to get back into more hospital-based medicine, because I had to go back and do my residency now. But that was 87 and Congress had done all these budget cuts and a bunch of slots were knocked out. So the slot that I was going to got knocked out. I was left with some limited options. I mean, I could have gone to another small clinic, but I thought at the time that was going to put me behind the 8 ball in terms of continuing my training. So I got out and I came home and I was able to pick up my training. I finished internal medicine, but because of my background in the military, between my military experience, my teaching experience in a teaching hospital, my oversight of paramedics in the field, an academic faculty appointment as an assistant professor of medicine because I was teaching, I qualified and grandfathered into the ER boards. ER residencies were just starting around that time. In fact, they were not looked at as mainstream. And it was, I actually had one of my residency mentors, one of the doctors, who was he meant well. He said, you can't go into the ER. He goes, it's a waste of your ability. He goes, because back then, traditionally, if you didn't want to finish a residency, you could at least go make a living and not starve and support yourself doing ER. This was when technology was exploding and we were just starting to realize that you needed a very specific skill set to be able to handle what was going on in the emergency room. So ER residencies, full ER residencies were just starting back then. So I was sort of on the front end.
Yeah, you talk about skill set, but I also would think you need a certain kind of acuity and personality to deal with emergencies as they come through the door, not knowing what's going to come on any given day.
Yeah, you don't have to be crazy to work there, but it helps.
Yeah, I'm sure. So you end up at Monmouth, the medical center, to finish out your residency. And it's sort of, as I look at the rest of your medical time, that was sort of fortuitous that's where you ended up to do your residency.
Yeah, I finished my residency there. I started working in the ER. I then got my ER boards. I got my first set of internal medicine boards in 92. I qualified for the ER boards. I took those in, I think it was 96. And then I stayed in the ER. Although I worked in multiple other ERs in the state of New Jersey, I always kept Monmouth as kind of a home base. I liked being in a teaching hospital. I actually got the chance to not just mentor students, I had the chance to mentor Lafayette students. I had several of them come shadow me at work in the ER. And it was very rewarding because some of them did go on in medicine and do Melroy D'Souza went into cardiology. There was a young woman who I was fortunate enough to mentor, Victoria Maxon, who was the class of 12 from Lafayette. She was a lacrosse player. and she came to one of the career nights and heard me talk about my experience in military medicine. Well, Vicky ended up going to PCOM in Philly on a full Army ride. She's now a major in the Army, finishing a urology residency out at Tripler Army Hospital in Hawaii. She had a better guidance counselor than I did.
Yeah.
But yeah, I met her when she was a student down in Philly. I was down there one night and I called her and we had dinner. We're still in touch. She's doing a rotation in Sloan Kettering in March. So she's going to be out on the East Coast for 3 months. I will see her and we're going to try to get up to Lafayette for a lacrosse game together.
Have to be proud.
I think she was pretty much a self-starter and would have found her way there without me. But it was
You
just
got
nice.
a pretty good map for her there.
Yeah, it was very interesting. So I've always liked to teach. And that's one of the things that I lecture now on hyperbarics at different hospitals all over the country. So I stayed with it because I had the opportunity to be in a teaching hospital and I liked being there.
So 24 years in the business, you become
Actually,
a
over
chairman?
that.
Yeah,
30.
oh, more than that, right? Yeah.
30, it was 30 years as an ER doctor, followed by 5 more years doing something called observation medicine, which is kind of a parallel track to the ER nowadays. So 35 years.
Well, some of the accolades that I read about, you improved patient care, you streamlined efficiency, you placed Mama's ER in the top 5% of ERs nationally. We know you were named Educator of the Year. You were featured in Cosmopolitan in 1999 in their Fun, Fearless, and Female article. That's a great title because I think it's
That's my
so
sister's doing.
appropriate.
My sister did that.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Tell us a little bit about how you got in the magazine.
I had, when I was in the service, I had a picture taken. There was a picture of me on an estate in England where I lived. I had a flat in this big manor house. And one of the pilots was in a set of men's briefs with just a bow tie. And I'm in a full dress tuxedo sitting at a table and he's serving me champagne. He was actually the husband of a very good friend of mine who took the picture. So my sister got a hold of that and she sends it in to Cosmo magazine and they call me and they said, we'd like to do this. And I'm like, is this a joke? I mean, if it were guns and ammo, I could understand it, but Cosmo?
Right.
I didn't do the whole glamour thing. I was too busy blowing up the chemistry lab. But it was funny. So I had to go to this luncheon in New York. I got to meet some very interesting people, a couple actresses and movie stars, but they also had people who, the regular Janes who were featured in there were some pretty amazing women, rocket scientist for NASA, someone who's kickboxing champ, someone who was a national snowboarding champ. I mean, I'm looking at these women like, what am I doing here? So it was interesting, but yeah, Carol, my sister did that.
Well, chatting with you, I think we know why you were there. I don't think there's any question about that. Top doctor in New Jersey 4 straight years. And maybe I see how modest you are, but it must have made your family, your parents, all of New Jersey so proud.
Well, that kind of recognition is nice because the New Jersey top doctor thing, it's voted on by your peers. In other words, it's doctors voting for other doctors. So the fact that doctors that I worked with in several hospitals nominated me as an ER doc, I mean, that meant a lot to me. It wasn't one person making the decision. And I was in that. Actually, it might have been a couple more years than that. It might have been 6 or 7. And there were, there's a category. So there might have been, they have top surgeons and top OBGYNs and top radiologists and top orthopedists. And then they had the top docs. So there were like maybe a half a dozen of us or 10 of us from New Jersey. And it was a big honor for me to be voted for that because, as I said, it came from my peers.
We have a couple of questions too from some people who are watching, friends. Barbara Kalavic, I hope I pronounced that correctly. Of all your amazing adventures and achievements, which do you consider the most exciting?
Oh boy.
I think that there's a long list. Well,
no, there's a couple of standouts, but I think, one of the things you mentioned, and Barb was captain of the lacrosse team senior year, the two of us were captains. for me, I think playing lacrosse is probably one of the standout things in my life because it affected a lot of things after. I never played lacrosse. It's something I picked up for fun. I ended up being good at it and I ended up being ranked in it. And I think that gave me the confidence to go and just try a lot of other things, to say, okay, I don't know if I'm going to succeed at this, but I'm sure as heck going to give it my best shot. And so that's up there. I summited Kilimanjaro in 2008, 6 months to the day after my 50th birthday. That was quite seeing a sunrise from 19,400 feet up was pretty amazing.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness.
That
Tom
was amazing.
Ojakian has a question.
Who does?
He said, I've also been concerned about fatigue doctors working way too many consecutive hours. I was told that the reasons the shifts are so long is so you can monitor a patient for a longer period rather than the patient seeing a different doctor each shift. I can understand that. Do you agree that that is the reason?
No. The traditional training in medicine is to follow an illness. However, the ER is different. The function of the ER is to accurately diagnose and stabilize. And then you hand that patient off if they're going to the ICU or if they're going to the OR to a care team that will now then follow that patient through their the course of their illness.
Mm-hmm.
Most ER shifts now, in the old days, they would put you on 24-hour shifts in the ER, which to me was way too long. Although it was not unusual to be able to get a couple of hours sleep. However, in the late 80s, with the explosion in the use of ERs for even routine problems, every ER now is so busy that you don't really get a rest, and the shifts have been cut. Most of them now are 10 hours. A lot of them are 8, but you're not seeing much in the way of 24-hour shifts now for emergency work, unless it's in a very, very rural hospital that does not have a very high active census. You're not going to see that in an inner city or even in a suburban zone.
Was this an area of focus when you were the chairman of the ER?
It was. Staffing patterns have to do with your volume. So you have to staff for what you think your volume is going to be. Now, you staff for average volume because you can always say, okay, well, we see this many patients in 24 hours. But when are they coming in? You have fewer people coming in at 2 a.m. than you do at 2 p.m. So you have to staff for when you have your peak periods of how many people are in the department. But remember, if you're staffing for average, 50% of the time you're going to be over, 50% of the time you're going to be under. So you have to make it work out. The hospital that I worked in at Monmouth is a block in from the beach. So we always had to put an extra doctor on in the summer, an extra staff member on in the summer, because we know that our volume went up in the summer. But most of the shifts, 8 to 10 hours, very few people are, and some of them were 12, but nobody that I know right now is doing 24-hour ER shifts. But that concept of following the course of an illness, many of the people who are that critically ill, they're not going to remember even seeing a doctor when they wake up in the ICU, or they wake up in the shock and trauma unit. They're not going to remember what's happened for the last several days. So who's seeing them or who's following them, even if you've had several people on a care team, it's not that critical. But you always want someone who knows the patient. But that happens after the admission to the hospital, because we're just not holding them in the ER for that long.
A great insight that most of us know nothing about. My guest last month was Leslie Ann Howard. She is with us tonight. So say hello, but I'm saying hello back to Leslie. She goes, wow, Catherine, amazing. Can't believe all you've accomplished. Given all of it, what was the most rewarding experience you had as a physician?
There, obviously, after 35 years in an ER, there's so many things that come to mind. Probably one of the most amazing was resuscitation on a 7-year-old that had been brought in drowning, and getting that. I still get the chills from working on this kid, and we had the pediatric team, we had the ER team. They dragged this kid out of the water, been in the ocean. And we did a full court press. We threw everything we had at this kid. And I kept thinking, I don't know if this kid's going to make it. And after almost 3.5 hours of resuscitation, we got his heartbeat back.
Oh my goodness.
And we didn't. Now, you don't know what's going to happen after that, because just because you get them back in the ER, they then get admitted. You don't know what their brain function is going to be like, but because he'd been in cold water, cold water, cold anything slows your metabolism. And kids have such a tremendous regenerative capacity. That really, I mean, we were all in tears when we got that heartbeat back. And he ended up surviving and getting out of the hospital. He obviously had some cognitive deficits for a year or two with school, but he ended up going on to be healthy. And that was probably one of the more rewarding ones.
I have a question from Lisa Castle, which I'm going to get to. So I'm going to hold off for just a second. She wants to know what you're doing now that you're semi-retired. I'll get to that in a moment, Lisa, I promise. But I want to get back a little bit to where you are becoming a patient. You're no longer the doctor, but now you are a patient, and it's a serious situation for you. Can you talk us through that a little bit?
I was diagnosed with breast cancer when I was 52. I had 12 normal mammograms in a row, no problem. I have no history of breast cancer in my family. Number 13, they picked up an abnormality. I went on to have a biopsy and node, they call it a sentinel node study to see if it had spread into the lymph nodes, but it hadn't, because I had been diagnosed early enough. I had an unusual finding in that when they took the strip of tissue out to do the biopsy, they found a second tumor. Not an extension of the first one, but an actual second type of cancer. It was a very low grade tumor, probably would not have spread, wouldn't have come to head for 10 years. But when you have two different types of tumors on the same side, in speaking with my treating oncologist, who actually was one of my classmates from Hanlon, she was brilliant. We decided to do a very aggressive treatment protocol. So I had surgery. I had 6 months of chemo, 6 years of hormone therapy. The hardest thing for me was it wasn't hard being a patient in the sense of going to find the best advice I could. The hard part for me were some of the specialists, not all of them. They assumed that because I was a doctor, I knew it all. And I'm not an oncologist. Sure, I know what breast cancer is, but what's the best treatment? Surgery versus radiation versus chemo, combination of all of them. What about reconstruction? Several different options on reconstruction. And it was just foreign to me from the standpoint that it's not my field. No, I'm not an idiot. It's just not my field. So my oncologist and the mammographer talked to me like a patient, which was great. Unfortunately, the reconstructive surgeon just assumed that I knew it all. So when I woke up and looked at I thought I got the wrong surgery, basically, because he hadn't prepped me adequately. He treated me as a doctor and not as a patient. So that led to some confusion. So that certainly colored how I approached patient care after that. I'd never made assumptions about people's background. I tried to explain things as simply as possible. And I didn't go into a lot of detail, but I did share with some of my patients that I was a cancer survivor. And I think it made a difference, because I think they realized that you're not just talking to them because you read the book. You're talking to them because you've been in that bed and you know what it feels like. And I think it at least lent a little bit more weight to what I was talking to them about, having been through that.
And can we assume now everything is good?
12 years out, still
that's terrific.
Still very happy about that. Yes, thank you.
One more question before we get to all of your outside interests, and there are plenty of them. Can you give us a sense of what COVID has been like for the profession of being in medicine? I think maybe that answered it right there.
it's been horrible. I mean, and for several reasons. First of all, 12 hours, we had to consolidate our staffing. So the volume, the numbers of patients that were coming to the emergency department actually went down because people didn't want to be anywhere near an ER because of the risk of infection. But the people we were seeing were sicker.
Mm-hmm.
We were in quarantine. We were in full hazmat gear, and you're working for 12 hours, which is, I mean, ER was always a physically demanding job. It was just that much more so over the course of the epidemic. So like I said, 12-hour shifts in full hazmat gear was exhausting. Watching patients who were isolated because there were no visitors allowed. So you had people who were dying with nobody but the staff around them to kind of take them by the hand. We were starting to see some light at the end of the tunnel, and then the second wave hit. And what was particularly disturbing to those of us that have been in medicine and been on the front lines of medicine for most of our lives has been the politicization of a disease and how it's just the misinformation, the use of information for personal gain to make you, everybody wants to be an expert. If you can show up on Oprah and talk about how this unusual approach or that unusual treatment makes you different, you look very erudite. But a lot of what was being put out there was such sham science, the whole ivermectin thing. And when you're seeing people, I mean, I've seen plenty of people die in the emergency department over 35 years, but to see this number of people dying from something that when we finally had a vaccine could be prevented is just heartbreaking for us. People think the mRNA technology that gave us it's going to bind to your DNA. We've had mRNA technology. We've had it for 14 years. It's already being used in medicine. The vaccines that are made now that your kids get, whether it's the smallpox vaccine, whether it's measles, mumps, rubella, polio, it's all done nowadays with mRNA technology. The misinformation is just ridiculous. And I don't care if you're on the left, I don't care if you're on the right. I mean, I'm at the point where I don't even want to watch the news anymore because of this. To be trained in science and to follow the science and to spend your whole life knowing how to interpret scientific data, to have some, whether it's a movie star or an athlete, nationally ranked athlete, go on TV or on their Facebook page and say, well, my personal physicians have advised this in lieu of vaccination. I mean, it's just, stop the insanity.
And we all grew up with problems. Those
Right.
problems were solved. It never became a political problem. So I guess we'll leave that there because I do want to talk about your outside interest. I think we have a picture of you on your Harley. So you're a Harley Davidson Street Glide rider. So you're a hog, huh?
Yep. I'm a Harley Owners Group member.
There
Yep.
she is.
That was taken, I think it was 3 years ago now. That's a Harley Davidson Street Glide. I got a bigger bike because I wanted to do long distance riding, and I rode down to Virginia, met a bunch of friends of mine, and that's actually down in South Carolina. And that was, we rode the Dragon's Tail, which is a 13-mile course with 118 turns in it. It's a real test of your riding skills. It was me, who was it? It was 4 guys and me. And all I kept thinking of was, you are not going to drop this bike. You are not going to drop this bike, and you are not going to stall out, not with the guys. But it was a great ride. It's basically something you have to take your time. You can't rip through it because you've got to set up for a turn. You've got to set up for your next turn before you're even out of the one that you're in. So it's a great test of your riding skills. It was a lot of fun. And I love the freedom of being on a bike. It's kind of the only thing that I've ever done that gives me the same sort of feeling as when I was flying in the service.
I was going to say the same adrenaline, huh?
Yep.
Well, it's not just riding the Harley. It's I know you love skiing, right?
Yes.
There she again on her Harley.
That was Eastern Shore of Maryland ride with a bunch of my girlfriends. I think that was last summer.
And I don't know why we're in the Watts Golf League.
I have no idea.
Yeah, I don't, that's my golf league, but believe me, I didn't put that up there. So you like to ski, right?
Yep.
And scuba dive. I know we have some
Venice.
pictures for that.
Yeah. My father got us into skiing when I was a kid. That's Vermont last year. My father put all of us on skis. I was 10, my sister was 7, my brother was 5. So I've been skiing for 55 years now. Some years not as much as others, obviously, but it's been great fun because we got a group of the old guard. There's myself, there's Laura Roberts, there's Barb Kurlavich. Crash was probably the best skier among us. Who else? Marguerite Hickey, who we played lacrosse with, Barb Bingham, who didn't play ball with us, but supported us. And we would get together and we'd all go out west, and we've skied Colorado, we've skied Utah, we've skied Whistler Blackcomb in Vancouver. And we're still looking at, I mean, COVID has really shut down our ability to go other places, but I'm hoping that now after the Omicron variety leaves, I'm hoping enough herd immunity that the world will open up again, because I got to get over to France. I got to ski France.
And scuba diving too, right? You're not just on the frozen stuff. You like to go into the water.
I don't know if you remember growing up. Yeah, that was Tahiti. That's about 7 or 8 years ago in Tahiti. I grew up every Sunday night after Disney. If you had your homework done, you were allowed to stay up and look at the undersea world of Jacques Cousteau. Do you remember that?
Mm-hmm.
And I was fascinated by this. And all I could think of was someday, I'm going to do this. And someday came when I was an intern. I was finally making, some money as an intern. And there was actually a Lafayette grad who was a couple of years ahead of me, Amelia Erickson. Amelia played field hockey and lacrosse. She was captain of the lacrosse team senior year. I think she played women's foot. Yeah, she played women's football too. Amelia was a resident in New York at Cornell when I was an intern, and the two of us went down to Cozumel and got certified in scuba diving. And I've been diving ever since. I know she dove for many years also.
And this is interesting to me only because of the contrast. You go from a Harley, but you also love just sitting on a bicycle.
I do a lot of cycling. I've done 100-mile rides.
Oh, there you are.
That's the Pont du Gard over the Garonne River in France. It's a Roman aqueduct that was put up around 100 BC, maybe. It brought water from the mountains down to one of the big Roman cities in France. And it's still standing. I mean, those guys knew how to build things. This was on a bike and barge trip where you live on a riverboat and you get up every morning, you get your bike off the boat and you get on the road and you ride along the river. I've done a couple of these trips. This one was in France. We went from Avignon through the Camargue, which is the French wilderness, down to the Mediterranean. I did one through Holland, and I've done one in Germany, and I was signed up to do another one last year, and then COVID sort of blew that out. But I've done 100-mile bike rides in a day where you just, you start at 6 a.m. and you go, 10 hours or so, and you can ride 100 miles. These are more sightseeing tours where it's not a race, it's just a ride. And you really get to see the countryside of wherever you're at from street level eye view, because it's different than being in a tour bus or being in even a car or rolling around a major city. You really get to get out and get in the countryside. So I was really happy to be able to do some of these, and I still do. And it's one of the ways to just really stay in great shape.
I don't know how you just sit around and do nothing, but I know you're part of a group, Physicians for Wilderness and Expedition. I'm assuming you've been to Antarctica, the Amazon, the jungles of, is it Tikal? The seas of Cortez, yeah. And you climb Mount Kilimanjaro. You've done all that.
Yep. I went scuba diving in Antarctica with Ingrid Visser, who was a New Zealand orca specialist on the ship that I was on. She was the ship's naturalist and I was the ship's doctor for an expedition and wilderness ecotourism group from Australia. Listen, you want to go to a party? Get on a boat with about 50 Australians on board. They didn't need a doctor. They needed a veterinarian. I'm surprised nobody went overboard. But yeah, we did. She was an orca specialist. We took a She was looking off the side of the boat. I remember she had binoculars. She goes, there's a whole pod of orcas. She goes, I'm going in. And I said, you cannot dive alone. You never dive alone. That's the first rule of safe diving. She goes, well, nobody else here dives. I said, I do. She goes, there's extra gear down in the captain's cabin. Go get it. So I'm in the water with a pod full of orcas watching them work with a New Zealand orca specialist. I mean, that was one of those moments you don't forget.
When's the book coming out?
After my mother passes, I'm going to have to change the names to protect the guilty. I can't write this while mom's alive.
I got you. I got you. I think we answered Lisa's question, but I'm sure she's interested in what's next. I know you want it. You got something planned in your head.
What's next? Well, as I say, I semi-retired. I moved back in with mom because mom is 96, or we're going to be 96 this summer. She's in great shape. She doesn't take any meds. She's still mentally sharp. She skied till she was 92.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So she doesn't need any meds. She doesn't take any meds. She doesn't need medical care. I basically I just keep the house while she's here. But at some point, I want to get an RV, and there are different types of RVs. I want to get something called a toy hauler. It's almost got a little garage on the back, and I'm going to put the Harley, the bicycle, the golf clubs, the fishing pole, and the kayak, and I'm going to point it west, and I'm going cross country, and I'm going to hit all the national parks. I'm going to hit the 8 states left in this country that I haven't seen. I'm going to visit some friends that I haven't seen since I was in the service or in school. And I've been very lucky to be able to explore a lot of the world. I want to see more of this country because I think we've got so much here. I mean, we've got incredible oceans, lakes, rivers, mountains. We've got desert. We've got great forests. I want to see more of this country while I can and while I'm young enough to enjoy it. So that's what's next, I guess.
Well, you have been, speaking of incredible, an incredible guest with an incredible life. And we thank you so much for taking the time to be with us on Primetime Pards. This has just been a wonderful hour for me personally. I'm sure anyone that has tuned in and watched feels the same way.
Well, thank you. That's very kind. But I think when people ask me, what do you think was the most incredible aspect of my life? It's the people that I've met, because, the people you meet along the journey, some of them help you get to where you want to go. Some of them give you an alternate point of view on where you want to go. Some of them just support you when you crash and burn on the way to where you're going. And I've been so very lucky in so many ways to know the people that I have, to have had great mentors at Lafayette in my medical training, that the most important thing for me right now is to be able to pass that on.
It's been great. It's been great. And I think a lot of people would want to know where you're going, because you are certainly still on the go. Catherine,
Straight to
thanks
hell.
for being of Primetime Pards tonight.
Have a good night. Thank you so much. Take care.
All right. Thanks to everybody, too, who tuned in. Primetime Pards will come up again next month, we think. So keep checking out on goleopards.com. My sincere thanks to Dr. Catherine Hanlon, for being part of tonight's Primetime Pards. For all of us, I'm Gary Laubach. Good night, everybody.
Good night.